In my last video I said it's much better that you obey the law than remember it. And that's okay. But you have to know what it is to obey it. You have to fundamentally have it in your heart, in your nature. It has to be written on you on some level of your being that you can express it by obeying it. Now, when somebody openly and overtly says, this is presumptively the law and not certainly, then crime is taking place. It'd be very different not to remember the commandments than to say, tell people to obey things that fight against them and call that the law. So, ignorance of what the law is can often be a precursor to trying to justify failure to obey it. I didn't know. And that's why in the law, ignorance is no excuse. It's not accepted as an excuse to not know what the law is. You see? And currently in Ireland, our government are saying that we should presume something constitutional, which is bad. So whilst it's not reasonable that most citizens in Ireland completely remember the Constitution and all of its parts, they must remember fundamentally how to obey it. And so telling people to presume things are lawful which are not lawful is a crime. It's the other extreme. You're, leading people to ignorance as to what the law is, so that you can tell them to pretend what you've said is lawful. That's different. Now, I think most people can agree, don't kick little puppies on the street for no reason. That doesn't need to be written into the law. So what does need to be written into the law is something that might be at some stage considered questionable, or might be more easily obscured as being the norm or acceptable than kicking a puppy, and therefore more of an importance to clarify. And that's why ambiguity or unsureness or uncertainty is not acceptable in constitutional law, because it's the stuff that's worth stating and clarifying, because it might be expected that somebody wouldn't have known that, or why that is the case. So, don't kick somebody's puppy isn't in the Constitution of Ireland, funnily enough, but I think everybody knows that. The person who will kick a puppy is a person who's submitting to another law which is not driven by their conscience, but is an evil that they've submitted to. That evil is violence. So, if they're submitting to violence, they're at its behest, and they might be its next target. You're defeated by whatever enslaves you, and enslaved by whatever defeats you. So is Ireland going to be enslaved by ignorance? Because even though I wasn't able to recite the commandments, I wasn't ignorant of them and still obey them. But it's different if somebody came out and said, this is presumptively one of the commandments. Oh, is it? Why, are there now 11? You'd have to be sure, wouldn't you? Because they were limited to 10. See the wisdom? 10 central laws. Thou shalt not take your neighbour's cat. What's said is don't steal anything of your neighbours and don't be jealous of it, such that you would desire to steal it. So what the commandments are dealing with the cause of the theft, covetousness. In other words, don't feel that God has not given you what he ought by envying your neighbour's goods or his wife, because God will give you in a timely manner what is yours. All of that takes submission. See the wisdom in there, in God's law? Because these are all the fundamental susceptibilities. These are all the areas that Satan would try to break into your house, your spiritual dwelling. He doesn't respect your threshold of your house. He's been trying to find ways to politically break into it since year dot, to tear it apart. And the thing that focuses on the areas where he would try to break in is the Constitution of Ireland. The Constitution of Ireland is the bars on your windows preventing Satan from getting in and dividing your household with his divide and conquer strategy. But he tries to convince you, don't you feel often imprisoned with these bars on your windows? That's how he tries to break in. No, I need them to keep you out. Now go away, devil. But don't you feel very blocked in? No liberty, no freedom. Remove the bars. You're going to keep your woman locked down in the house. What is this, the Stone Ages? You're pulling her into the cave by the hair. No, she is a valued member of my household, integral to its upkeep. She's fundamentally leading society in ways by being a stay-at-home mother. So he would attack there. Because the strongest relationship for the preservation of society heretofore is that between mother and child. And Satan doesn't want to have to fight mother and child, so he'd rather separate them. Because that's a bond even Satan can't break. So he tries to not let it form in the first place. Baby's born, taken away from Mammy. Why? Because that's when the bond occurs, the chemical bond, very powerful. Oh, he doesn't want to be fighting that. Don't let it form as strongly. Those moments, those things that best nourish that event and best nourish baby, like, we'll try and cut them off, clip them early. Like the umbilical and Mammy and baby spending time together. Years ago, baby would be first given to Mammy, straight from the nurse's hands into Mammy's, immediately, for that bond to occur. And Daddy would be called in when Mammy was covered over. Now Satan's attacking it from the get-go. In the vast majority of cases, unless there's special little darlings, he'll let them have their moment, you know. Because they've committed to serve him with their life. He's nothing to gain by damaging their family. They're already ruined. He already has them in his pocket. Job is done there. What's the point? Kicking a dead donkey. especially when you might want to ride it later. So whatever is left in it, you'll need it. Spiritually dead donkey. What's the point in kicking that? So that's the point I'm making to you. These systems of obscurity, ambiguity, are never good. That's why we have written law. That's why we have the commandments. The commandments got a little bit obscure in my memory. I was able to refer to them. Now I remember them. If somebody was telling me, remain in that level of obscurity, and I'll tell you what the commandments are, and you just presume that they're the commandments, and obey them, where would that leave us? So the term presumptively constitutional fights against the knowledge of the law, such that even if your innate understanding of the law was good, in that you would know naturally, behaviourally, how to engage the law properly in society, you're being told to disobey the law, even though you knew naturally how to do it, by way of this obscurity and ambiguity, this doubt as to what the law is. And then that would be exploited by the term presumptively constitutional, telling you to pretend lawful whatever we tell you, on the basis of your ignorance. See? So what's the job then of the government? Is it to exploit your ignorance, or is it to remind you of the law? It's the latter. It's to remind you of the law whenever there's any doubt, whenever there's any lack of clarity or any ambiguity. And that's why we assign the President to be custodian of the Constitution. Much like why we put, or God rather, put the commandments in stone. So you couldn't say, these are presumptively the 10 commandments, because they'd be etched in stone. So there'd be no doubt. You understand what I'm saying? So we have the Constitution of Ireland written down such that the term presumptively is blatantly a criminal attempt to obscure the law and to get you to obey things that naturally fight against it. So any president who's supposed to be custodian of the Constitution telling you to obey a legislature which started out as a bill on their desk being considered for addition to the legislature and then eventually arriving in the legislature after having been signed in by the President, whose job it is to test the constitutionality of the bills prior to enacting them into legislature, because it's his job to uphold the Constitution as the custodian of it. That's why the bills are given to him in the first place. Why else would they be given to him and not just anybody on the street? Because he's a government official. But what does that mean? What is his office? His office is custodian of the Constitution. What's the function of that office? To uphold, preserve and ensure the Constitution for the following generations or the following president. So that the following president can do the same. So why would a president ever lie and claim that he doesn't have to test the constitutionality of a bill prior to its addition to the legislature? Why would he ever do that? He would only do that if he himself is a criminal, an impostor pretending to be the custodian of the Constitution whilst claiming he doesn't have to do that job. It'd be like a bouncer telling you, I don't have to stand at the door. But you're a bouncer. So it's like custodian of the Constitution, I don't have to check legislature for its constitutionality prior to enacting it. And then you go to your doorman and you say, he says, I don't have to check IDs prior to allowing people into the nightclub. What do you mean? You're going to check their IDs after you let them into the nightclub? And they're drunk? You do things in a logical sequence. You check the ID before you permit people access. You check the bill prior to its addition to the legislature. Anything else is illogical. It's basically stupid. So we wouldn't permit it. So any president that's telling you, I don't have to check the IDs before letting them in, I don't have to check the constitutionality, the lawfulness of the bill before enacting it as legislature, is lying to you. They're distorting, in your view, even the idea of their office or what they're there to do. They're fighting your understanding of what they should be doing, fundamentally. Because if you didn't know that the President was the custodian of the Constitution, why would you ever address the issue when he tells you, I don't have to check the constitutionality of a bill prior to its enactment? I've consistently asked people, have they read the Constitution? Hands up who's read the Constitution. I think only one young person said she'd read a good bit of it. Some of it. How can they expect to know their rights? They're wide open to presidents telling them the lies that Michael D. Higgins is now telling them about his role and the expectations placed upon him as the one upholding that office or engaging that office of president. It's crime. It's actually sedition. What they're doing is highly treasonous activity which should see them in prison for life, if you're going by the laws of Ireland, which of course we should, and not the laws of their witchcraft covens like Freemasonry. And actually the laws of Ireland are quite strict on not allowing access to the organs of state to members of secret societies, one of which is Freemasonry. You're not allowed to be a guard and a Freemason, yet I know that many guards, if not all of them, are Freemasons. Full of wizards. So they've infiltrated and broke the Constitution that they're there to uphold by so doing. So their very being there means that they're not worthy of the office. They shouldn't be there. They're not officially accepted or inaugurated if they don't fundamentally submit to the basic premise or function of the office. Much like the President, if he's saying he doesn't have to check as a prerequisite the constitutionality of bills prior to enacting them, if he's claiming that, he's an imposter. Because you can't be custodian of the Constitution and make that claim. They're two opposed positions. Praise Jesus Christ of heaven. Blessings in Jesus' name.